You're listening to Out Front with Family Forward, a podcast designed to bridge the gap between research and real-world parenting by providing insights into how early life experiences can shape a child's future. Join us as we explore the spectrum of family life and equip you with the knowledge to make a positive impact on your family's journey, one episode at a time. Welcome to Season 2 of Out Front with Family Forward. I am Sharon Skidmore-Stern. I am your host, and I'm a Chief Program Officer at Family Forward. And with me today, I have my co-host, Dr. Jamie Scatia. She is the director of our assessment team, and she's going to be joining me today to have this conversation around resiliency. Thank you all so much for joining us. So last season, we talked about connection. We spent a lot of time focusing on what it is, how to get it, and really just some simple ways to bring that into your family and into your parent-child relationship. We talked a lot about kind of the mental health issues that are associated with lack of connection, depression, anxiety. The Surgeon General brought it up as a concern because we were just increasingly more disconnected. So this season, we really wanted to hammer down on one specific thing, and like I said, that's resiliency. So we're going to talk about what is resiliency, what is not resiliency, and how do we create opportunities for resiliency building in ourselves, in our children, and in our communities. The format that we're going to use is going to be a myth-busting format. So we are going to offer some common beliefs around resiliency, and then we'll have a talk about what resiliency really is. So I will start. I'm going to read each one of these myths, and then you and I can kind of break that down, Jamie, and kind of talk through why some of these myths can be, detrimental in terms of our understanding, and what are some ways that we actually can build the true meaning of resilience.
Sounds great.
Yeah. So myth number 1. Resiliency has to do with the here and now only. If you can smile through a traumatic situation, you'll be better after.
There's a lot to unpack here.
So much to unpack here.
I think resiliency has this reputation of if I make it out on the other side, then therefore I'm resilient. And we hear all the time with kids, especially, kids are resilient, which suggests that their experiences don't impact them. And they do. So while smiles are good and smiles help us get through a situation, part of being resilient is having feelings and being emotional, being able to express what you're experiencing and not trying to just shove those things aside, but being your true self and developing a sense of optimism for the future and a sense of hope about what's going to come.
Right. And it's the idea that, can we look at adversity? Can we look at those tough moments? And whether they're small moments that happen throughout your day, or if there is truly some larger event that might be, exceptionally draining on your system or your family system, that it is about, not just putting on that brave face. And I think so often parents specifically feel that real pressure to have to put on that brave face. And a lot of it too, I think, is, what is the burden that I might be putting on other people? Mm-hmm. So there's this conflicting message about, leaning into others for support. So it really is this, put this smile on and put a brave face on, but that's actually the opposite of resiliency.
Right. And I think that there is a reputation for resiliency to mean strength.
Right.
And being emotional to mean weakness. And that hits a little bit on what you're talking about of this, if I express myself or if I ask somebody for something, then I'm weak. And that's not what I'm supposed to be. Whereas that's really what gets you through and helps you to become more resilient on the other end.
Right. And I think the other piece that you kind of touched on too that I really like about this particular piece of resiliency building is the element of hope building, right? Mm-hmm. Because when I can look back, and it can be something as simple, I remember when my daughter would get sick, and whether it was one of those terrible stomach bugs or pretty significant, like respiratory thing, it felt like the darkest times when your kid is sick, especially as I was single parenting. But man, when we came out on the other side, I really felt like, man, girl, you did it. You made it.
To
right?
you or to your daughter?
Well, to both of us, honestly. It was really and that kind of became a building block when those things would come up again. Again, kids get sick, right? But, for me, it was one of those things that was super stressful, and I think it's stressful to a lot of parents. And it's a simple everyday thing, but at the same time, reminding yourself, like, I got through that.
Right. It was temporary.
Right.
It may not have felt that way in the moment, but having hope that the stressor, the traumatic event, whatever it is temporary.
Right. And it can be, the building blocks, the resiliency building piece can be getting over even the simple adversities that come into your life, those typical ones. So, I love that. So are we ready for myth number 2?
I'm ready.
Okay. If you push your feelings aside and tolerate what's happening, eventually the situation will end and you will be resilient for making it through. So this is kind of like the put your head in the sand and wait for time to pass. A little bit disassociation, like I'm just going to kind of check out. But this, again, is the opposite of what is resiliency building. And I think we should say, I think you and I know pretty well that everybody uses some disassociation, right? So some you want to take a break, whether it's you grab your phone, you do a little scrolling, or you play a game. Like disassociation or checking out for a little bits of time is actually a pretty healthy coping mechanism. But if that is your prevailing way of dealing with it, again, it kind of goes against that. What is resilience? Are you resilient because you've just kind of knuckled down and got through it? Or are there things that you're missing in terms of that actual capacity building?
Right. And are you trying to knuckle down because that's what you feel like you should do, or that's what you feel like you need in that moment? Because there's always situations in which I don't feel comfortable sharing my feelings, or this is not the right time. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about trying to pretend like your feelings aren't there. And I think part of that, too, is developing coping skills that are active. So dissociation in some respects can be really useful. And so can exercise, and so can even just 5 minutes of, I'm going to go in my room, I'm going to put the TV on for the kids, and I'm just going to take a deep breath because that's what I need right now. Some kind of active decision making in your coping can be really helpful.
Well, and some of the other things that I think are worth discussing is during times of adversity, one of the resiliency building pieces can be keeping up with routines and traditions and things like that in your household.
And remembering, where is it that I find joy? What is comfortable to me? And how can I keep those things going? When we have kids that come in our office who have really significant events happen in their lives, they lose a parent or something, they're in a car accident. One of the things that we always recommend is how can we continue to provide some kind of normalcy? So when there is stress going on, where are spaces that we can lean into the normal routine of every day that we're used to, that's predictable, that's comfortable?
Right. And sometimes that feels like it goes against kind of what we would expect to happen when there are significant stressors. I know a lot of times kids who are living in foster care, if a placement disrupts, a lot of times we'll be working with perhaps a new foster parent provider. And, one of the first greatest things you can probably do is establish just some predictability and a sense of normalcy, because we already know that that disruption is going to evoke some feelings, some emotions, some challenging behaviors. So again, I think it's normalizing the reaction to stress, adversity, significant transitions, but recognizing that part of building resilience for ourselves and for our kids is being able to pull in and draw on some of those routines and rituals.
Right, because by definition, the things that are most traumatic and stressful for us are the things that are unpredictable, things that are new, things that we're not used to and are kind of uncomfortable. So finding some of that balance and leaning into what is comfortable can help, boost our ability to get through and, become more resilient.
Right, and the other piece of this too is that when is the right time to implement and practice those things? It's not during the adversity.
Right.
It really is being intentional in all the other times. Like I have often used the metaphor, like people don't in baseball, they don't practice baseball. They don't practice batting during the game, right? They practice that for hours and hours and hours before and after the game. The game is the game. So, having these types of things in place and these things to kind of fall back on are part of, again, that resiliency building pattern. And the other thing that is mentioned here in terms of reality, it's goals and motivation, right? So what are some goals that you have for yourself or your family? What is your motivation, and how do you dig in and how do you tap into that when you're feeling overwhelmed?
Well, it can feel like too much, but sometimes, similar to coping, it doesn't have to be something really big and dramatic. It can be, okay, what is my goal for the next hour?
Right.
What is my goal for the end of the day? How do I want to end the day? Maybe it's, I want to be able to sit down and put my child to bed and read them a book, and that's my goal. And that's awesome if that's the goal. There's so many benefits to, maintaining that routine and connection with your child. So I think part of the discussion that we're having is resiliency, coping, being successful. All of those things seem really big,
Right.
and they don't have to be. It's the moment by moment things that we're talking about.
Right. And at the end, especially with this one, by ignoring your feelings, by pushing feelings aside, your body, that takes up a lot of energy, right? So, think of times when you've held a lot of stress. You can feel that physically, and whether that's, whatever physical way that manifests, headaches, stomach aches, neck aches, just tension, right? So then you can start to think about what are the physical ramifications of, if I am perceiving myself as having to kind of like basically suck it up and keep everything inside, there are physical consequences to that.
It seeps out whether we like it or not.
Right. Yeah, that one was one, like the pushing your feelings aside. I think we see that so often, with families.
With every age, with every
Right.
role in the family, it's just part of what's become in our culture. And, resiliency really is backing away from that.
Right. So myth number 3, this one I think for me was one that completely hit home. Resilience is about independent survival. Powering through alone is the way to get to the other side. And a lot of times I think we've all had this, right? Where you've got that person, that friend, that family member who just seems to have adversity after adversity after adversity. And they seem to just power through it. And, well, they must be so resilient because they just keep going. Or, people who've experienced, traumatic loss. Like you see these things all the time. And all of a sudden it is, you're resilient if you just have this individual capacity to overcome. And I know for me, that is something that I absolutely internalize. I have moved entire rooms of furniture on my own just because I didn't want to ask anybody to help me do it. Then afterwards I realized, well, that just seems really silly. But that's my internalized structure really of what is resilient is doing it on your own by yourself.
Back to this idea that asking somebody for help is a sign of weakness. And really, when we think back on early times, we were all living in community, and we have this language of it takes a village to raise our kids. But then in practice, it's so hard for us. And I think that there's some vulnerability that's required for us to be able to say, I need support, or I'm having a tough time right now. All those things require us to be exposed and vulnerable, and that can feel kind of counterintuitive when we are going through tough times.
Well, and like the societal message. So I think so often we just default to independence, right? I've overcome adversity. I've done this. I've had these struggles. I don't know how many times, just even on social media, rule number 1 about the comments, don't read the comments. So, of course, I absolutely am reading the comments. And even if it is, it can be a story about just, someone overcoming some significant adversity. And most people, like, oh, that's so amazing. I'd love to hear this. And then there are those people who come in and it's like, well, I overcame 10 times worse than that. And I didn't have, nearly the support. And it's almost this tension between, again, that kind of, I think the disconnect that we have a tendency to feel in our society right now. But the idea that to overcome or to get help, like you said, is almost like a weakness. And the individual piece is almost this one-upmanship, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I see that too in, not taking a sick day for work when you feel like you need it. There's some pride in, I never take my sick days or I never miss work. And what is that about? You know, because you're not taking care of yourself. You're not being respectful of the other people in the office when you go to work sick. So when we dig in past that initial facade of pride, there's not really a whole lot underneath that.
Right.
And, thinking about my neighborhood even, we have a neighborhood of a number of families. And I said to one of the moms, you're going through a hard time. If you want to drop your kids off sometime, my kids would love to play. It'd be really easy. And she said to me, I need you to ask me to do it first. I need you to bring your kids to my house first so I don't feel like I can't do it or that I'm asking too much. There's just these unsaid messages that really impair our ability to connect, to be resilient, and to lean on one another in the way that I think we were kind of created to do.
Right. Well, and I think some of these messages are also internalized, like intergenerationally.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think there's also a lot of, when I was younger, it was X, Y, and Z. And everything is just different now. It's literally comparing apples and oranges, but the messaging then becomes like, well, we didn't have any of this stuff and we were successful. But actually the conditions that generations before were successful in were just different. Right? So resiliency looks very different in 2024 than it did, I don't know, way back in, 1960 something. Not that that's super far away since that's when I was born, but whatever. So, but that also becomes the reality, right? And that becomes this, what are we internalizing about this? And how are we not absorbing kind of but way back when it was this way? Like, well, here it is now. We have more resources. We know more, so we can do better. We can support each other. We can have a sense of community. I said it in the last season. Growing up in South St. Louis, I mean, it was a community, whether you liked it or not. Like I said, the neighbors knew what we were all doing, and if we were, in a place we shouldn't be, my mom inevitably found out about it. But again, all that has to do with, in order to solve problems, to be able to shoulder discomfort, to be able to navigate complex situations, to be able to deal with adversity, all of those things actually contributed to my feeling like I can do these things, right? So it creates some internal reserve, with that other side being, how do we also ask for help when we need it? So the social aspect is so critical.
And the modeling.
Right.
The being able to see that that's what people do to stay healthy and that that's a good thing as opposed to a weak thing or an undesirable thing. And two, feeling a sense of belonging and that connection that you felt in your community, again, like it or not, you still felt like you had a place there. And to be able to develop that for ourselves and our kids almost goes beyond just having somebody to chat with, right? But feeling like you have a place that really allows us to feel valued and seen and validated when we're struggling.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Myth 4, this one I think is going to resonate with a lot of people. I think this is a common one as well. Just another way of kind of saying this individualistic ideal is what everyone's shooting for, is pulling yourself up by your bootstraps means you are resilient.
Oh, I have a lot of feelings
So
about
many,
this one.
yeah. I mean, all of them, because again, but when this is messaged, or when you are vulnerable and you share some of your struggles, if you are met with like, just work harder. If you just did better, if you just worked harder, if you just put more something into it, then this situation wouldn't be happening. And how disempowering and disenfranchising is that when you're saying, I am just really struggling, as would anybody in a situation of a lot of adversity, or even if it's just I'm having a really bad day, I don't have the resources internally right now to pull up to be successful in this moment. And a lot of the societal pressure really is pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
And sometimes people don't have boots on,
Right.
And how do we help support those around us to get boots, before we're even suggesting put all those feelings aside. This myth kind of really pulls all the other myths together, because we're saying, if we're struggling, how do we lean into the community to say, you don't have the internal resources right now, let me help you.
Right.
Or you're struggling with your feelings and they're getting in the way of being able to reach down for your bootstrap.
Right.
They're a barrier. But allowing the space to say, maybe that's where our hope is. Maybe we say, down the road, I'm going to be able to do that. But this is where I am right now. And, that's okay. And how do I find comfort in what I know? And how do I find acceptance and peace with where I am right now? That's really more of what resiliency is than the action of pulling up by your bootstraps.
Right. Well, and again, it is not a unilaterally internal reservoir that we pull from, right? It is not, it's just a great part of who I am. I am just an inherently resilient person. Resiliency is something that is developed over time, just like attachment and connection. Like those are the things that are building blocks for resiliency, for the ability to problem solve, for the ability to have hope that I can make it through this challenge. And resiliency is also that sense of that sense of mastery. Like I can get what I need to overcome this particular issue. And in a lot of ways, then how do I share that, right? Because then part of resiliency is that, I can share with others, the things that I've been through, and I can be there for other people, right? So I do think the bootstrap one is one that is so common right now. Well, actually always, but and I think one thing that is really resonant is the fact that, like you said, like not everybody even has the boots. So it's not a level playing field, I think, for everyone in terms of that resiliency piece.
And I'm glad you brought that up because, that's a big piece that I think it's easy to miss. And also the fact that resiliency is not necessarily a state or a trait of who we are, but a process that we learn, that grows, that evolves over time, and that we can tend to.
Right.
We don't just have to say, I'm just not a resilient person, but we can say, oh, there are things, and we'll talk about this more in a future episode, but that there are things that we can do to help foster resiliency both in ourselves and in our family.
Well, absolutely. And there are some core things that can really set the stage for developing that level of resiliency, and they are basic needs, right? So it is housing, it's medical care, it's family support. It is having all of the basic needs met, because it's really hard to be super resilient when you are just trying to survive, right? So again, in terms of communities, which we'll talk more about too, but part of resiliency is your community.
Well, and also knowing that we are never our best selves when we are struggling to survive.
Right.
Whether that's because we have an actual, something dangerous right in front of us, or something felt unsafe. we are never going to be our best selves in that moment. So it's not until we can get out of those moments one way or another that we're going to have the capacity to focus on resiliency building.
Well, this all can be really confusing, right? Because we've been taught to work hard. We've been taught to do things independently, to sacrifice our well-being, and, really sacrifice for others. But I think today we've kind of level set some of the myths around resiliency, some of the challenges that it comes, but that was the internalized messages that we've had. Are there other social or systemic barriers to being able to build that resilience? Anything else to wrap up this episode, Jamie, in terms of that?
Well, I think just recognizing that it is a little bit of an uphill battle in some ways, that we are working against societal messages. We are working against the culture that we're in, which is just much more independent by nature. And we're working against poverty and, no boots, essentially, when we're in those situations. But that doesn't mean that we're hopeless.
Right,
and
absolutely.
that I'm looking forward to the next few episodes to kind of learn more about, okay, how do I do that? What do I do with that?
Right. What is that path of hope for building some of that resiliency?
Right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jamie.
Thanks for having me.
All right. We are wrapping up episode 1. We will see you next time on episode 2, where we'll continue the discussion with Dr. Ashley Wagner on resiliency building in children. Thank you for listening to Out Front with Family Forward. For more information and resources to support you and your family, visit FamilyForwardMO.org.